Welcome to the information series Air Toxic Standards for Area Source Boilers. For ease of navigation and quick reference, we have divided this series into 4 parts. This introduction module provides a general overview of the rule, to whom it applies, and compliance dates. You can find additional information under what to expect from an energy assessment. You will walk through tune-up and follow a step-by-step guide for reporting and record keeping. The term area source is a designation made by EPA to mean a small stationary source that emits less than 10 tons per year of a single hazardous air pollutant, or less than 25 tons annually of a combination of hazardous air pollutants. While we make reference to major source boilers and certain incinerators covered by separate but related rules, this series is designed specifically for owner-operators, state rule writers, and maintenance contractors of area source boilers. The purpose of this series is to help those subject to the rule better understand and comply with the standards. Why regulate boilers at all? Boilers emit hazardous air pollutants known to cause or exacerbate certain health concerns. Depending on the fuel type used, boilers can emit particulate matter, also known as PM 2.5, carbon monoxide, hydrochloric acid, mercury, and trace amounts of other heavy metals. Health effects from these pollutants can cause a range of respiratory issues, especially asthma among children and older adults. There are approximately 1.5 million boilers in the United States used to produce steam and/or hot water for energy or heat. While the individual emissions from these units may be small, the total emissions from all boilers are significant. So let's look more closely at the types of boilers we're focusing on. Of the 1.5 million boilers, 86%, or approximately 1.3 million, are area source boilers fired by natural gas. These boilers emit little pollution and are therefore not covered by the final standards or the rule adjustments. The remaining 197,000 units are subject to the boiler rules, and of these, approximately 14,000 are major source boilers. That leaves roughly 183,000 area source boilers located at nearly 92,000 facilities that must comply with the standards. Requirements will vary depending on the size of the boiler, the type of fuel burned, and whether it is a new or existing unit. So, how do you determine if your facility operates a boiler subject to the rule? The boilers we are addressing in this series are those found in a wide range of locations across the U.S., from small church basements to large university campuses. These boilers generate heat for many of the places where we live, work, and conduct business, in commercial establishments, institutional facilities, and in small industrial operations. Commercial locations where these boilers may be used include stores and malls, laundries, apartments, restaurants, hotels and motels. Institutional boilers are those found in educational and religious facilities such as schools, universities, and churches. Other institutional sources generate heat for medical centers, hospitals, clinics, nursing homes, and municipal buildings like courthouses and prisons. And finally, boilers are used in various industries such as the manufacturing, refining, processing, and mining sector. You are subject to the rule if your area source boiler is located in one of these facilities and it burns one of the following fuel types: coal, including coal refuse, petroleum coke or synthetic fuels derived from coal, oil, biomass, or other solid and liquid non-waste materials. As a reminder, boilers that burn only gaseous fuels or burn any solid waste are not covered by EPA's area source boiler rule. For clarification, a gas-fired boiler is any boiler that burns gaseous fuels not combined with solid fuels. Gaseous fuels include, but are not limited to, natural gas, process, landfill, and coal-derived gas, refinery gas, hydrogen, and biogas. A gas-fired boiler that periodically fires liquid fuels during periods of gas curtailment, gas supply interruption, startups, or for periodic testing of 48 hours a year or less is still considered a gas-fired boiler. Other area source boilers not covered under the rule include hot water heaters, temporary boilers, boilers used in residential dwellings of up to 4 families or in a single unit residence that has been converted or subdivided into apartments or condos, electric boilers, waste heat boilers, boilers used as control devices to comply with other standards, research and development boilers, hazardous waste boilers, and boilers subject to other regulations under the Clean Air Act. Boilers used to burn waste are covered under incinerator rules and are not discussed in this series. So, you've determined you are an area source boiler subject to the rule. How do you comply? Depending on the size and type of boiler you own or operate, you will need to comply with one or more of the following requirements. Adhere to worker management practice standards, which includes a boiler tune-up every 2 or 5 years and a one-time energy assessment performed by a qualified energy assessor. You may also need to meet numeric emission limits. Work or management practice standards include following the manufacturer's recommended procedures for operating and maintaining your boiler. For boilers subject to emission limits, this means minimizing the boiler's startup and shutdown periods and conducting them according to the manufacturer's recommended procedures. If these procedures are not available, follow recommended procedures for a unit of similar design. Work and management practice standards also include periodic tune-ups. Of the roughly 183,000 units that must comply with the standards, over 99% or approximately 182,400 need only conduct these tune-ups every 2 or 5 years. Like tuning a car, a boiler tune-up can increase efficiency and help save on energy-related costs. Before we discuss those boilers subject to either the 2 or 5 year tune-up, let's define a new versus an existing unit. New sources are those that began construction or reconstruction after June 4, 2010. Existing sources are those that began construction or reconstruction on or before June 4, 2010. New sources are not required to complete an initial performance tune-up, but are required to conduct the applicable 2 or 5 year tune-up no later than 25 months or 61 months, respectively, after startup. With some noted exceptions, boilers that are subject to a tune-up every 2 years include both new and existing coal units with a heat input capacity of less than 10 million BTUs per hour. All new and existing oil and biomass units, regardless of input capacity, must also have a tune-up every 2 years. Boilers required to conduct a tune-up every 5 years include seasonally operated boilers, limited use boilers, oil-fired boilers with heat input capacity equal to or less than 5 million BTUs per hour, and boilers with an oxygen trim system that would otherwise be subject to a 2-year tune-up. You can learn more about the specific tune-up requirements in the walkthrough tune-up video in this series. An energy assessment is another way to identify potential savings of both energy and costs. Further efficiencies can be achieved if a facility chooses to implement the energy-saving measures identified during its energy assessment. New boilers are not subject to the energy assessment requirement. However, all existing coal, oil, and biomass units with a heat input capacity of 10 million BTUs per hour or greater must have a one-time energy assessment performed by a qualified energy assessor. The assessor should have the background, experience, and expertise to evaluate energy-saving opportunities for the types of boiler and energy use systems located at a particular facility. The energy assessor may be either a company employee or an outside specialist. This assessment needs to have been conducted since January 1, 2008 and must meet or be amended to meet the energy assessment requirements of the rule. If your facility operates under an energy management program compatible with ISO 50001 that includes the affected units, the energy assessment requirement is satisfied. You can learn more about the specifics by viewing the energy assessment video in this series. Finally, less than 1% or roughly 600 units have emission limit requirements that must be met. Most importantly, these pollution standards will provide direct health benefits to many of those in our communities where we live, work, and play. Depending on the size and type of the boiler, you may need to comply with applicable emission limits for mercury, carbon monoxide, and particulate matter. This table provides specifics on emission limits you must meet. So, when is compliance due? There are 3 important initial deadlines to know: initial notification of applicability, initial compliance, and initial notification of compliance status. We will cover the compliance requirements and dates here, but for more information on where to submit your forms, see the reporting and record-keeping video in this series. For existing sources, the deadline for submission of initial notification of applicability is January 20th, 2014. Sources subject to work or management practice standards such as a tune-up or an energy assessment must demonstrate initial compliance no later than March 21st, 2014. Initial notification of compliance status is then due within 120 days or no later than July 19th, 2014. Sources subject to an emission limit must comply by March 21st, 2014. For sources that conduct a performance stack test, you have an additional 180 days to demonstrate initial compliance with the applicable emission limits. Initial notification of compliance status is then due within 60 days of conducting the performance stack test. For new sources, the deadline for submitting an initial notification of applicability is no later than 120 days after startup. New sources are not required to complete an initial performance tune-up, but are required to conduct the applicable 2- or 5-year tune-up no later than 25 months or 61 months respectively after startup. Since new sources are not required to complete an initial performance tune-up, EPA's intent is that you are subject only to work or management practice standards and not required to submit an initial notification of compliance status. New sources subject to an emission limit standard must demonstrate initial compliance no later than 180 days after startup and must submit initial notification of compliance status within 60 days of completing their performance stack test. US EPA is working with both the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to provide technical assistance that will help boilers burn cleaner and more efficiently. Helpful fact sheets are posted on the Energy Star website shown here. Additional information on these programs can also be found at the web address shown here. If you have further questions regarding your boiler tune-up, energy assessment, or reporting and record keeping, please refer to the additional information videos in this series. You may also find more information in one of the fact sheets located on EPA's website shown here or the Small Entity Compliance Guide. If you need further technical or compliance information, feel free to contact the following. Thank you for your time and attention.